It's time to stitch out the cherry blocks on our 2 scoops bench pillow.
Ice cream in a cone. Ice cream.
The cherry blocks are on page 15. I have the background fabric fused with interfacing on the back, and I have the batting. These blocks also need the red glitter from the embellishment packet. So let's get started on the cherries.
So before I work on the cherries blocks and put them together, I wanted to kind of talk about how I organize my files so that I can take them to my machine and it's organized the way I like it to be organized. So I have a folder called Embroidery that I keep on my desktop just because it's easy to access. And in this embroidery folder, I have all of the files that I've purchased, or sometimes you can get free files, and I have them by pretty much designer. And so I use Kimberbell the most, and so I put an asterisk at the beginning of Kimberbell so that it's always at the top. And that way, if I add another folder, I'm not, trying to figure out where my Kimberbell folder is. So when I open up my Kimberbell folder, I have all of the different projects that I have purchased from Kimberbell, and that includes the Me Time website. Now, the Me Time website is where I get the Hoop Studios. It's a subscription website, so they have several different subscriptions. You can get the Bella Box, the Hoop Studio, there's other pieced subscriptions anyways, and so I designate so I know which is just Kimberbell and which comes from the Me Time website. So for example, I am doing the 2 scoops, and so in my 2 scoops I have everything that I've purchased. I have a couple of ideas, some label ideas. I have a list of the thread colors. And then I have all of the files that I have purchased. When you purchase a project from Kimberbell, it might come with a book that's already printed, and it has the embroidery files for the blocks. Now, the quilting background files are always a separate purchase, and so that's what this folder is. This embroidery file are the files that come with the project. This would be the instructions. They have several, depending on the project. There's just the PDF, which is what I've printed and am going through, and this is just the whole project, start to finish, and it goes over all the cutting diagrams, and then of course then starts in with the block. And so that is the PDF. Now, some of their projects are better used for larger hoops, but they do give directions for multiple hoopings for, say, like a 5x7 hoop. So some of the blocks in this project, it looks like there's 3 that if you only have a 5x7 hoop and that's your largest, you would need to follow these directions in order to make that large block in a 5x7 hoop, and not the directions in the instructions. And they tell you in the instructions, if you're using a 5x7, to refer back to these instructions. So then this design happens to have a few SVG files, and I think I'm going to use some of those on my ScanNCut, and you can't really see because they're in white, but these are for again, SVG files. Instead of using the applique where you put your fabric down, tack it down, and trim it with scissors, you can pre-cut your little fabric pieces and skip those couple of steps. And so these are, again, totally optional, but they do have them on a lot of their projects. Now, the quilting bundle, these are the backgrounds that came with the quilting bundle for the 2 scoops. And I simplify the names. For example, this lines 5, you open it up and it has all the, different sizes, and that's great when you buy it. You don't just buy the size needed for the specific project. It comes with all the sizes that you could use for other things. And so technically this lines 5, and I'm going to look at the cherry, when you purchase the bundle, it's going to have a file name of KDQ 089 lines 5. That's too much when they're all, that would be the same with the food 5 would have that KDQ and some numbers. And so I change the name. I just leave it the lines 5. I think that's easier for me. Another thing I do is when I open this up, you can see that I only have the PES file type, which is what I use. I have a Brother Stellaire. When you purchase this, you will get all the file types for all the machines. There's, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 different file types. I don't save all those because I don't need them. If for some reason in the future, let's say I were to get another machine that uses a different file type, I could just go re-download, because I have this particular project is an older project, and so it's on a CD. I could just, re-download if I needed a different file type. The newer projects starting in 2025 don't come with CDs or USBs with the designs. They are available when you purchase. It has a code where you do need to make a Kimberbell account so that you can log in and get your files. But then again, you always have them. So I simplify all of the names, and I keep the quilting backgrounds in a separate folder. I keep the embroidery files. These are all the files for the blocks. We're getting ready to do these 2 cherries. We did the 2 scoops, but you can see how they have all this extra wording in the file name. These I don't change. I just change the folder. Anyways, and then what I do is I made another folder called Combined Files. So now that I'm starting to work in software, and I am going to be doing these 2 cherries, I'm going to put them into one hooping and combine the background with the cherries so that I don't have to add both of them at my machine. However, this is totally optional. Software is always optional. You can do any of the projects, like we did the first block where you just bring the files in. But because I am going to be using software, and when I save this, I will put it into my Combined Files folder. Now that makes sense for me because I don't want to really mix up the purchased files and just the files that are as is, that as you get them from Kimberbell. And so I have chosen to make a Combined Files folder. However, if you want to not do that, and let's say you do your cherries and you add your background quilting, you could add it to the embroidery files and just find it. That's fine. I like having the 3 separate folders. So when I'm done saving it in my folder, I will just open my USB, drag it to my USB. I have all 3 of these folders. These are the only ones that I have on my USB that I take to my machine. And I can choose, if I have a Combined Files folder, or like I did the first file, I added the quilting background first, then the embroidery file, and that's fine too. So that's kind of how I organize. And you just need to find out, if you're going to be doing software, how you want to organize your files. Or I guess even if you don't use software, you need to organize your files. You can put them on USBs. I like having everything on the USB. Again, I have capabilities of doing Wi-Fi. Let me find it. Under utility, Wi-Fi. So I could save my design that I'm doing, my cherries, and I could send it straight to my machine if it's open and stitch it out. I prefer not to do that. I like having all the files on my USB and not, adding a whole bunch to my machine. But that's just me. And so you don't even have to use a USB if you have the Wi-Fi capable machine. All right, so now let's work on the cherries and get these ready to combine so that I can go stitch those blocks out. So now I need to bring in my files for the cherries. So I will go back to my embroidery folder that's on my desktop, and I'm going to start with the quilting background. Now you can come to this merge stitch file icon, click it. You would have to navigate to wherever you keep your files, bring it into the software, and then do that whole same step to bring in something else. Where you click on it, you'd have to navigate. When I am bringing files in, I just open the folder, and that way I don't have to navigate back. I'm just always right here. And so I will open the quilting bundle. The cherries do both use the lines 5, and I need the 2x2. So I will just drag this in. Now I'm only going to do one background quilting for the time being. So now I need to go back to my embroidery file, and I need to bring in one of the cherries. We'll just bring in the first one. I will drag and drop that into the hoop. Now when you bring something in, it is centered, and so I want these two to be centered. I could bring in the background quilting, both of them, both cherries, select them, and go up to utility and align and distribute and still get them centered, but it's just easier to do it one at a time. Now that I have this design, I am going to start making changes because of how I cut my batting. So if I come to this right hand side and I open up the background quilting, with Kimberbell, there's always 5 steps to their background quilting. There is the placement for the batting. The second is the tack down of the batting. The third is the placement of the fabric. The fourth is the tack down of the fabric. And then the quilting. Now I used all 5 of these steps on the block that I just did, the first block of the project. That's not how I normally do it. I wanted to show for someone that might be new that you just, you can do it. You don't have to use software. I used all of the steps and we made a block and it turned out great. But I did mention that I cut my batting to size, and that takes out a couple of steps for me. I, of course, need the placement because I need to know where to place my batting. So I need to have this first step. The second step is the tack down of the batting. And because I have cut my batting to this exact size, running this stitch won't do anything. And so I choose to delete this. Now, if I was not using software and I was just bringing these in my machine at, the time I was stitching out, I could just skip this step. But because I'm in software, I'm just going to remove this step altogether. So I've got it selected and I will just hit delete. Now, the next step is the placement for the background fabric. And if you saw the first video, or if you've done any Kimberbell, you know that the placement for the fabric is only 1/4 of an inch past the batting. And Kimberbell has us cut quite a large piece for background, for appliques. And so for me personally, for the most part, unless it's a specific block, but really for the most part, I don't use the placement of the fabric, just because our fabric's so large and it's going to cover it. And so this next step, I also choose to either skip if I'm at my machine and have brought my files in, or because I'm in software, I will just hit delete. So that leaves me with the placement of the batting. I would place my batting and place my background fabric, and then the next step would tack down the background fabric. You do need that, and then the quilting. So that's how I choose for the most part to do my designs. Unless again there's some, it's an odd design, and we do have some piece blocks coming up that will be different than this. And then after it does the quilting, then it will go on to do the cherry. Now, for this design, looking at the cherry, it also has a placement. Again, this is an older project, and I think they did things a little bit different. And so this placement and tack down would be if you are just doing this block without the background quilting, because you can do any of these designs and not add the background quilting and maybe quilt traditional where you would do all of your designs and then take it to a long armor or do some other type, maybe the clear blue tiles, and quilt the whole entire quilt at once. Then you would need these. Because I already know and have my fabric down and quilted, I don't need these first two steps. So I hope that that's not confusing. Again, their designs, for the most part, their newer designs usually don't have these steps for the embroidery file. But I am going to select that first, hold my shift key down and select that second step. Again, I don't need those because my fabric is already done. It's down, we know where it's at, and it's already quilted. So I will just delete those two steps. So now after my quilting is run, it will start then with the placement of the fabric for the cherry. Now that is, something I do need that placement because it's an applique. The next would be the tack down of that fabric and then the stem. And so that is what I need for this design. And so now that that design is ready, it's centered, I'm going to select both. You can drag a selection box. I'm on a Mac, so I can always Command A and it will select everything on my screen. And for now, I'm just going to move it up. Now I need to bring in my second design. So I can go back to this folder. I am going to bring in the quilting first because I want that in the background. I could, since I was on the cherries, I could bring in the cherry and bring in the quilting second and then rearrange them over here, but it's just easier to go back. It's also the lines 5 and the 2x2. Then I'll go back to the embroidery files and get the second cherry and bring that in. Whoops, I double clicked that and so it brought it into a second page and I don't want that. So I will just drag and drop that. So now I have the second, they come in centered, which is what I want, and I'm going to do the same things with that I did with this. So now it's 3 and 4, and so 3 would be the placement. The first step would be the placement. I do need that. The second is the tack down of the batting. I don't need that. I'm going to hold my shift key down and select that third step, which is the placement of the fabric. I don't need that. And I will delete. So I'm left with those same 3 steps. Now for the cherry, I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to select the first, hold my shift key down, select the second. Again, we don't need those because our fabric, we already know where it's at and its place and it's down. And so I will hit delete. So now both of these files are the same, just with a different cherry. So now I want to place them where I want them in the hoop, because then I'm going to do one more step that will even combine these further. And so I am going to select that second cherry and move it over. Select the first 2, and I have to make sure I get both of them so that they don't become uncentered. And let's see what hoop I'm in. If I come to the preferences folder, I'm in my 7x12. So I'm going to keep my 7x12. I use that again most of the time. Now I can make these so that they're a little bit more even. And I'm going to put them as far apart as I can so that I can do these in the same hooping. So now if I were just to save this file and take it to my machine, I would have them both in the same hoopings. They're combined, so I don't have to bring in the separate background quilting and the file. I don't have to skip steps because I've deleted what I don't use. However, if I come up to the stitch simulator, you can see that there are really two sets of colors. And so if I were to run this as it stands now, it's going to do that whole first block start to finish. Then it's going to start the second and do the second start to finish, which is fine. But because I'm in software, I am going to do what's called color sorting, and that will merge some of these steps together so that, for example, when I am doing my placement for the batting, I want it to do both at the same time. When I do the tack down of the fabric, I want it to do both blocks at the same time, etc. So what I need to do from here, now I do need to have these exactly where I want them, because once I color sort, they will be combined into one design and I will not be able to move these independently. So I will come up to Utility and Color Sort, and it's been changed by 4 color changes or 4 stops, and I always select a new view. If for some reason it hasn't done what I thought it was going to do, then it's just easier to come back to this original and make any changes. So I always select a new view that will open up a new page, and now you can see that there is just one file versus our original that has the 4 separate files. So if I come back to this new view, let's see if it did what I wanted it to do. I'll come back up to the stitch simulator, and now you can see big blocks of colors and they don't repeat. So that means that it's doing what I wanted it to do. So if I run, you can see that it does both placements for the batting. I would put both pieces of batting down. Then it does the tack down of the fabric. Then it does both blocks quilting. Then it does the placement. You can see this little blue placement of the cherries at the same time. It will tack down. We're going to be using glitter. It will tack those down, run the stems, and so everything is combined. And that's why I use software. There's less steps. I take out the steps I don't need. It's faster. I can combine blocks if I want, and it just, I love software. So that's exactly what I want this block to be. So now I need to save this. So I will come to File, Save Stitch File As, making sure that I'm, on the correct folder. Now this is where I save into my combined files folder. So I'm in my Kimberbell. So here's my embroidery file that I have on my desktop, this little pink file. I made it pink. I'm now in my Kimberbell. I'm in the 2 Scoops bench pillow, and now I can choose where to save them, and I am going to select the combined files folder because I've combined those and I want them to be in that combined files folder. So then I will name my design. So I'm going to name this Cherries ×2, and I am going to save. So now when I come back to this folder, my Kimberbell folder, and I open up that combined files, here is the file that I just saved. I will add this to the combined files folder in my USB and then take it to my machine. I wanted to show how I actually save it to my USB. So here is again my Kimberbell folder that's on my desktop under that embroidery folder where I keep all of my files that I've downloaded. And I'm opening my 2 Scoops folder, and so here are those 3 that I have on my USB. I open the combined files, and that is the file that I just saved with these cherries. So now I have plugged in my USB, and so it's down here, and I can open that, and you can see that I have for this project those same 3 folders. And so again, the quilting bundle, the embroidery files, so if I want to just do it right at my machine, and then the combined files, which of course has nothing on it yet because I haven't put it in there. So all I need to do is just drag and drop this file that I just saved into my combined files folder. So now when I take this to my USB, I will open that combined files folder and add this to my machine. And so that's how I save. All right, let's go get these stitched out.
I am at my machine ready to stitch out the cherries, and I wanted to show, since I hadn't done this on the first block since I was at the end of my muslin strip, this is how, for the most part, I hoop my stabilizer. And that's whether I'm using muslin as a stabilizer or regular stabilizer. I will just leave it attached to the roll. So here is a strip of muslin that I cut, and I cut it to fit. This is my 7x12 hoop, and so I have it hooped with all of the excess going off the back. And so when I put this in, I will just flip that excess off to the back. Now, the only thing that you kind of have to pay attention if you're hooping like this is not to let this get caught under. And so you need to, make sure that it's out of the way. So I'm going to attach my hoop and bring in the files for the cherry. So I have saved on, again, my USB that's on my little pigtail cord. I will go to embroidery and to my USB. And because I combined these in software, I'm going to open my combined files folder, and here are the cherries. So I will select and hit set. Now I am in my 7x12 hoop, but if you saw the earlier video or any of my other videos, I do not have a setting in my machine for a 7x12. And so I have to use the 8x12. So there are a couple things I'm going to do when I use my 7x12 hoop, which, by the way, I use more than any of my other hoops. So I will select OK. And now you can see that there's a lot of space up here and a lot of space down here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose embroidery, but I'm going to go to layout and move, and I'm going to move this. It's not going to be a whole lot because I spaced these out in my software as much as I could, but I am going to move it, over so that there's a little bit more room on the right side. And that's, again, because my machine thinks my hoop's wider, and it thinks it's 8 inches wide, and I only have a 7-inch wide hoop. So I want to always scoop that to the left. Now the second thing I'm going to do, and the reason that I keep my stabilizer attached to the roll or to the strip, is so that I can save. So if I were just to stitch this out, I would be wasting all of this down at the bottom of the hoop. And that, again, is the point of me keeping my stabilizer attached. So now I'm going to move this all the way down. And the reason I'm moving it down is because my strip that's still attached is off to the top or the back. And so all of this will be able to be used for something else. So now I can select OK. I always like to go to the minus plus needle, and that way if I need to skip a step, which in my case I shouldn't because I've done all the skipping or deleting in the software, but it also allows me to skip stitches if for some reason I need to. I just like to be on the screen. So the first step is going to be the placement of both blocks of the batting. So let's run that. For this placement, I just used the first color that will be seen on my design, and that is the color for the background quilting. And so now here are my two little pieces of batting cut exactly to size. So I need to place them right in those placement lines. And again, I spray these lightly with the spray. And now you can see why I skip the tack down, because it's exactly that size and it won't do anything. And then I skip the placement for the fabric, because when I bring my fabric over, you can see how much larger this fabric is, and there's just no need for that placement line. Now these are going to overlap a little, and I'm going to give them a little shot of spray, and I don't care if they overlap. I just want to make sure that, for example, this one isn't way over here where it's going to get caught in the stitching. So as long as I put it about halfway, then it will be fine. And the same thing with this one. And you can see again how much bigger our fabric is. So now the next step is going to be the tack down. So you can see how everything is running at the same time. And again, that just saves steps and saves from changing the thread back and forth to do just one block and then the next block. And that's why I love, again, that's why I love software. So now it will be the quilting for both blocks. After running the placement line for the cherries, I need to take the red glitter and peel off this clear carrier sheet. You need to make sure that that's off. You can just throw that away. Now, this is the piece that they give you, and you can see it's huge. I love to save, so what I think I'm going to do is cut this down a little bit. And again, this is totally not necessary. You could just cut this in half and put a piece over. In fact, you know what? Let's just do that. I'm not going to worry about cutting it down. I have a lot of red glitter. So I would just cut this down and I'm going to place it over. You could put a little bit of spray or tape. I'm just going to kind of hold it and we'll tack it down. Okay, something I just noticed that I didn't pay attention to in software is that when it color sorted, it didn't do the cherries at the same time and then the stems. You can see that this next step is the stem of the cherry, and I don't want to have to take this out, trim the glitter, put the brown thread in, and then have to do that again. And that's kind of the whole point of software. And I wasn't as diligent, I guess, to make sure all the steps were combined like I wanted them to. So that's an easy fix, and that's why I like being on this screen. So the next step is, again, the stem, and I don't want to do the stem yet. So I am going to use my down arrow, and that is going to bring it over and do the tack down of the cherry. So let's do that, and then I'll come back and show you what I'll do next. So I just stitched that second cherry, and so now you can see that it's wanting to do the stem for the cherry on the right. So before I take these out and trim them, I am going to go ahead and use my up arrow and go back till it gets to the original stem. And now I'm going to take out my hoop and I am going to trim around the cherries. Now this will not have any other cover stitches, and so this is called raw edge applique. I will use my little curved straight scissors and trim about 1/8 of an inch around the cherries, and then those cherries will be done. So let's get those cut. So after I trim them, I need to press. This is called HTV, which stands for heat transfer vinyl. It's the same vinyl that you would use to make a t-shirt. And although you really don't have to press because it's tacked down, I am going to press this. And so I will cover it with, I just use muslin as a pressing cloth. And I have a fun little cute iron. And this just needs to be pressed for, I don't know, 8 to 10 seconds, not very long. And then that's down, and now we're ready to stitch the little stems. So it's done with the first stem, but remember I had to move ahead. So right now it thinks it's wanting to do the cherry, and I've already done that. So I will use my down arrow to skip because I've already done that. And now it's ready to do the stem on the second cherry. So I'm done with these cherries, and my next step would be to take them out of the hoop and trim them to size, and then we would be done. However, I am going to start on my next block. And so when you see this video, it will go straight to cutting and sizing the cherries. And I'll show more about how I am adding my next block with the next video. So let's finish these cherries up. So I'm ready to take the cherries out, and you can see that I have my next block done, and I go more into detail when I stitch this next block as to why I hoop the stabilizer the way I do and leave this strip attached. So you can check that next block out to see. But now I'm going to cut these cherries, and we'll get these cherries ready to go. So now there is not one of the orange pop rulers that is a 2x2, and that's what these need to be cut. So I will just use a regular ruler. Actually, there is a little solid ruler, and I'll bring that out to show you. But I do want to have you notice one thing. So this background quilting is going into the seam allowance. You can see that the way it is stitched, the way it has to travel, it goes into the seam allowance. So while normally I will take out the basting, which is the tack down of the background fabric, and cut my stabilizer right next to the batting, it's really not needed, because no matter what I do, there's going to be some of the muslin in the seam allowance. And so for me, it's really not worth the time to take out just this little 1/8 of an inch, when again, no matter what I do, there will be the stabilizer or my muslin in the seam allowance. So for blocks that have stitching in that go past the batting, you can see right here that here is my batting line, and you can see the quilting, the background quilting is between the batting and the tack down. So I am just going to cut this to size and be done, and there's no extra trimming. So let me get the little ruler that they have, and I'll show you how to use that. So it's not a 2x2, but it is a 2-inch. This is technically like a flying geese. It's a 2.5 inch by 4.5, and this will be cut 2.5 by 2.5. And so what I can do is, instead of just taking a regular ruler and measuring and going around all 4 sides, I can take the 2.5 inch width and I can line it up. I'm lining it up so that it's, as close as I can get with the outside stitching lines. And then I could cut these 2 sides, and then I would flip that and do the same thing, line this up, and then I would have my little 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch square. So let's get these trimmed to size.